On today's episode of the Yaesu The Radio Show podcast, we're going to be doing part 2 about Yaesu System Fusion. Going to be kind of exploring now how Fusion was created and how it kind of was developed and being used. And that's for today, Friday, January 10th, on the Yaesu The Radio Show podcast. And welcome everybody to the Yaesu The Radio Show podcast. I am your host, John Crook, N9UPC. Thank you for tuning in to part 2 of a 3-part series on Yaesu System Fusion, C4FM, and FDMA. If you remember last week, part 1, we kind of delved into a little bit of basically saying, okay, here's what Fusion is about. Here's where it kind of came up. Here's where the concept was and all those kind of things like that on there. Now we're going to delve into more of like how the structure is of it, right? We're not going to say how to necessarily use it, but we're going to give you the concepts of how it can be used. And that's for today on the Yaesu The Radio Show podcast. What I did want to go ahead and take a moment, though, before we jump into today's podcast, us here at Yaesu USA wanted to take a moment and kind of honor and remember Dennis Motzenbacher, K7BV. Dennis was our past VP of Yaesu USA. He retired right before COVID. I was very, very, very fortunate and lucky enough to be able to personally work with Dennis, get hired by Dennis. And unfortunately, on the morning of Thursday, January 9th, we were made of the sad news that Dennis had passed on. And we wanted to go ahead and say thank you, Dennis. Thank you for being in all of our lives at Yaesu. Thank you for going ahead and being a mentor to not just us that worked there, but to numerous people that knew Dennis. They knew Dennis as a great CW operator, great contester, very involved in HF, the nicest guy, always willing to help people and everything like that. And we're saddened to hear of the loss, is the only way we can put it, of our dear friend Dennis. So to the family, our thoughts and prayers are with them at this time. And until we meet again, Dennis. But with that being said, as I said, we're going to be talking part 2 here now of Yaesu System Fusion. And in order to make sure that you understand what part 2 is about, let's quick do a recap of kind of part 1. So part 1, we kind of talked about how it was brought to fruition, kind of those concepts on there. But the biggest part of part 1 was kind of talking about the different modes that Fusion can operate in. Now, you're saying, John, digital is a mode, right? Well, there's like sub-modes of Fusion. And if you remember, there is the voice data mode, the voice full rate mode, the data full rate mode. Oh, wait a minute, I don't know of any of that, John, or anything. Well, that translates down to DN mode, VW mode, and then DW mode. So DN mode, once again, a lot of people operate in DN mode. That is where we're taking that 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth signal and we're splitting it into 6.25 kilohertz bandwidth for the voice and 6.25 kilohertz bandwidth for forward air correction, for GPS data, all those kind of things like that on there. So that's the DN mode. And that's really the most popular kind of Fusion mode that's out there. The second type of mode of operation within Fusion is the VW mode. Now, the VW mode is the voice Y mode. That's the 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth of your voice only. There's no data air correction. There's no forward air correction. There's no GPS information that's being sent with it. It's all digital voice. And that, I will tell you, just with the DN mode and with the VW mode, that just echoes that whole aspect of like why Fusion is high quality digital voice, that 9600 baud data stream that comes through that gives you such great voice quality. And then that final one that we talk about is the DW mode. That's the data wide mode. Once again, only accessible within the radio. The radio itself will access DW mode, and that's just like send Fusion telecommands, send pictures, do those kind of things like that on there. So those 3 modes have, in essence, I guess you can kind of put it, those are the foundations of what we do for digital voice with the Yaesu System Fusion, aka C4FM. Now, where this comes into play is when Yaesu System Fusion, YSF is sometimes it's referred to as, but we like to call it Yaesu System Fusion, or C4FM FDMA, was used. And where that comes into play of we here is with Fusion, and more importantly, the aspects of what we call DSQ. That was the first iteration, because we're in Yaesu System Fusion 2 now, but Yaesu System Fusion 1 really was great for the aspects of it, but as like anything, it just evolved, right? It evolved. It was there, and then people used it, but we wanted to improve on it, so we did improve on it, and that's kind of where it is. So before we can kind of understand how we use Fusion today, we got to kind of go back into how Fusion was used in the past. Well, with Yaesu System Fusion, when it first came out, you have a thing with digital. Alrighty, let me back. I guess the best way to start is back up. So let me even go back further. Analog. Let's start out with analog, right? If I am using analog and I want to selectively talk to someone, selective access to, whether it means opening up a repeater or opening up another radio, whatever the case may be, you have obviously what they call CT, CSS, and DCS tones. Digital doesn't have that. CT, CSS, and DCS are sine waves within an analog signal, right? So when you have that play with digital, digital is just ones and zeros. How do you do something that is a sine wave or a square wave with ones and zeros? It doesn't work, right? Ones and zeros is data. Sine waves or waveform is analog in essence. So what happened was when Fusion, Yaesu System Fusion came out, what happened is that we needed to have some sort of means of selective access. And the way we did selective access with Fusion was using what we call DSQ. Now, DSQ stood for Digital Signal Squelch. Okay, that's what DSQ stood for. And it was very similar to sort of like a selective call for like marine radios. And what you did is you had 128 different codes, okay? And what would happen is that you could either turn on or off DSQ, and if you turned it on, then you had to select a code. And then what I would do is I would come along, if I wanted to talk to you, I would have to know what code you're using, because otherwise your radio wouldn't open up, right? It wouldn't hear. That's fine and dandy, but if you don't know what code, so if I'm talking to my friend Bill and Bill's on code 100, am I going to have to go ahead and go, DSQ what? Bill, can you hear me? Bill, can you hear me? Bill, can you hear me? Go 2, 3, 4, 5, all that kind of stuff like that. Yeah, you'd have to do that. There's no way to kind of find out what code Bill was on. So while DSQ allowed that selectivity, DSQ also had a function used in there, which was called break. Now what that did is when you selected DSQ and you selected break, so not on or off, but break, what it did is it almost acted like it sent out all codes 001 through 128, and just like everybody's radio, regardless of what code they were on, would go ahead and open up. So if Bill was on what code 100, but then Sally was on code 50, and someone else was on code 10, and someone else was on code 119, if I keyed up on break, and I was on the same frequency, we're all on the same frequency, I would open up all those radios. Now, DSQ was nice in that regards because it did give you selectivity. That's what you wanted to do. DSQ was like a CT, CSS, DCS, but once again, it had this aspect of break, and in addition, it also did not have selective transmit and receive, meaning DSQ was on transmit and receive, or DSQ was off. There was no transmit only, receive off, or receive on and transmit off. There was no selectivity like that. It was all or none. Okay. What happened is that created a lot of problems because the intent of DSQ was selectivity, right? You went along and you did your selectivity, and once you did your selectivity, that kind of aspect on there. With that being said, people just ran in break all the time. That's all they did. They just ran in brake all the time. So what would end up happening in that case is that when brake was on, it would open up regardless of whatever. So there would be people that would go ahead and attempt to make sure that they were running, like, let's say DSQ 30, right? 030. They were running DSQ 30. Well, a person wouldn't go to bother. They would just run brake all the time. Now, you're saying, well, that doesn't sound too bad. If you need to get the conversation through, if you need to get message through, John, you need to do that. Right. But DSQ was designed to be able to say, okay, so I have a repeater, 30 miles to the east of a city, and I have a repeater, well, let's use realistic. Let's say 10 miles east of a city, and then you have another repeater on the same frequency 10 miles to the west. Now, if I'm in the center of that city, if I want to use a repeater on the east and use it in Fusion with Yaesu System Fusion, the original, that had a DSQ code of, let's say, 10, and the one on the west had a DSQ code of 30. Well, what I would do then is I would say, okay, cool, I want to use the east one, turn on DSQ, go to 10, and on UPC, key up, and I'm talking on the east repeater. Once again, then I go to DSQ to 30, then I'm talking on the west repeater. But here's the problem. If I ran brake, I could hit both repeaters from where I'm at. Now I'm running brake. Now I'm hitting repeater the east and the west at the same time because they're on the same frequency. And now what's happening is it's creating chaos. It's creating confusion. Because let's say you have another user 10 miles further east past the repeater. So that person A now can only hit the east repeater. And I have person B, and B is 10 miles to the west of the west repeater, and they can only hit the west repeater. Now here I am in between the east and the west, and I'm using brake. So I'm like, hey, this is N9 UPC. Okay, the guy from the east can't hear the guy talking on the west repeater, so the guy goes ahead on the east, hey, N9 UPC, hey, how's it going? Oh, good, it's going pretty good, blah, 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 blah. So I'm talking to the guy on the east repeater. The guy in the west is like thinking, geez, this guy's nuts. He's talking to himself, and he's having an actual conversation. What is going on? So that was kind of a little bit of an issue with brake. But, as, once again, Fusion evolved, we went along and we found out people are saying, hey, I want Fusion to be able to do this. I want Fusion to be able to do that. How can we get it to do this? How can we get it to do that? And the way it was we had to kind of change a little bit of the operating structure. Now, we weren't changing. When we went from Yaesu System Fusion to Yaesu System Fusion 2, we weren't changing, in essence, the common air interface, the CAI, what sometimes we'll call it. So the signal that was traveling through the air was the same frame rate, okay? Okay, it was. But we changed things a little bit in a difference in that we moved away from DSQ with Yaesu System Fusion 2 now, and we went to DGID. So we got away from DSQ, and we now went to DGID. Now, right away off the bat, DGID was great. Okay, it was really, really great. The biggest problem that we've ever had, I will say, with DGID was getting people to convert from DSQ. Now, here's the worst part. The way you converted from DSQ was a firmware update. That's all you did. That's all you had to do was a firmware update. And then, boom, it would change it from DSQ to DGID, make the radio be able to do DGID, and radio to be able to go ahead and have DGID selectivity. Now, DGID was changed in that it went from code 00 to 99. So we say there's 100 DGIDs. Where in all reality, there's not really 100 DGIDs. There's actually 99 DGIDs. And in that case, in that regards, 00 is off. It's open squelch. Meaning it doesn't need a DGID to open up. So DGID is 00 is turned off. Now you have DGID 1 through 99. Now here's the cool part. DGID and DSQ were compatible. So if you had a radio that was transmitting DGID 1 and someone using DSQ 1, you still were able to talk to one another. But what DGID did, yeah, that's really weird. It went along and it said, we're not going to do 100 through 128. We're getting rid of those. Not a lot of people use the upper DSQs anyways. Okay? But then also DGID said you can have DGID now set up as to transmit a DGID but receive 00. Or you had the ability to receive a DGID but transmit 00. Or you had the ability to transmit one DGID and receive another DGID. So in other words, you could go along and you could transmit DGID 1 but listen on DGID 2. So it separated it from being all or none to basically going ahead and being able to say, okay, here's what it is. To put it into a more graphical representation of what DGID did, and the easiest way to describe it is I want you to think of DGID very similarly to what CTCSS and DCS does. Okay? CTCSS and DCS, now especially with the way DGID could do transmit and receive separately and independently of one another, does what it does. So you could transmit a CTCSS tone of 100 hertz and receive squelch. Or you could transmit squelch and receive 100 hertz. Same thing with DSC. Okay? You could transmit 023 and receive nothing. You could transmit nothing, receive DCS 156, or you can have it split. However you wanted to do that. You could do that with DCS and CTCSS, and now you could do that with DGID. So what is the purpose then of DGID? I get asked a lot. Well, once again, applying it to the principles of CTCSS. So now what you do is you can take two users, and they're talking to one another. Let's say they're talking on the fusion frequency 145.5625, okay? And then now they're transmitting in DGID 00, meaning they're going to receive anybody that's talking digital, and they're going to transmit no DGID at all. But now the whole purpose of DGID is, let's say you now have grown, okay? Let's say you now have two users that want to talk, and they don't want to hear anybody else, and they're not intending to talk to anybody else. Now you could have someone, let's say on 145.5625, using DGID for transmit and receive, and they're just going back and forth. They're talking, they're happy, they're only hearing each other. Only hearing each other. I want to stress that. I'll get to that in a moment, though. Hearing each other. So now you got some other users that are there. They don't want to hear the people talk with DGID 1. So they go ahead and do 145.5625, and now they're doing DGID 10. And with DGID 10 now in this case, guess what they're doing? They're talking to one another, only hearing one another, and not hearing anybody else. So now you have it very much like CTCSS and FM. No issues, no problems whatsoever. But remember how I said they will only hear one another, or they won't hear each other, but they'll basically not hear one another. I want to talk about visualing now. So even though person, we'll call them A1, A2, are talking on DGID 1, and person B1 and B2 are talking DGID 10, even though they're only listening to one another, on their screens, they're going to go ahead and be seeing the other people's call signs. Okay? They're going to be seeing each other like that on there. Much like with a CTCSS tone, if you're sitting with your radio and you're on, let's say CTCSS tone 100, and someone is using CTCSS tone 67, your radio's not going to open up. You're not going to hear them talking, but you're going to see the light up like there's traffic. And much like you can do in analog, you can do in Fusion, and you could push the monitor button, and then you will hear that conversation on there because you're breaking the monitor for your DGID that you're using. So is it just that in regards? Well, no, it's not just that in regards either. DGID also allows connectivity, steering connectivity. Now I'm going to stop you right here because I feel like I can feel people already talking about it and saying, oh, then DGID, John, is nothing more than a talk group. No, it's not. It's not, because unlike DMR and Fusion or P25, you have to have a talk group. You have to have minimum of one. This is not. okay? And unlike like talk groups, you could turn on DGID so you could transmit with one and receive with another. You really can't do that with the other modes on there, okay? Talk group is a talk group, kind of resides in there. So with DGID, it really is like CTCSS. So what can you do with DGID even further beyond communication and linking? You said linking, John. What does that mean? Well, in the DR2X, which is part of Yaesu System Fusion 2, we included the IMRS board. And we'll kind of go into more stuff like that in part 3, okay? But what DGID does is it allows for that, in essence, steering of things, like CTCSS. I don't know the average age of our podcast listener, I don't. But I can tell you that I know average ages of our customer base, and I can tell you for sure that there are some people that are very well familiar and very well understanding what we used to call back in the day, quote unquote, PL steered repeaters. I remember I used to be part of a repeater group that if I wanted to talk locally, I used one PL tone, but then if I wanted to talk like down a linked system, I used another PL tone. So I would just switch PL tones. Same repeater, same frequency, same everything else. But like if I wanted to go into, repeater, I'd go in like a 110. And then when I'd go in on 110, that was great and everything. But then what would end up happening is if I wanted to go down the network further, then I can go to tone 100. And 100 would allow me to go ahead and go down to the different link system on there. So that's kind of what it is. Now, if you're looking on the YouTube thing, you kind of see a graph on there with the way the repeaters are. So in this case, we have repeater 1, 2, 3, and 4, each using DGID 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what ends up happening in this case is, hey, I want to talk locally. On repeater 1, I use DGID 1. But if I want to talk and connect things together, then I'm going to go ahead and use DGID 10 to connect myself, in this example, repeater 1 to repeater 2. Now, I'm on repeater 3 using DGID 3. I want to talk to repeater 4. I'm going to use DGID 20, and that's going to link it up there. So not only do you have the ability to link things together, okay, but now you have that ability to be able to hone in on your conversations. And that's the concept of DGID with Yaesu System Fusion 2. Now that you understand that, Fusion has a built-in feature, built-in option that we call DPID. Okay, DPID. Now what DPID is, that stands for Digital Personal ID. Now what happens with the Digital Personal ID, this is a unique ID built into every single Fusion radio. You don't set it. It's not associated with your call sign. It's not anything. It's like an electronic serial number that's broadcasted with your Fusion transmission that goes down the line. Okay, that's what it does. It goes down that line right there and everything like that on it. What ends up happening in this case then is that when I transmit, I can always see your DPID. If I go into my radio, I can see your DPID. If you use Yaesu's Wires X, you could see the people talk with their DPID. And the DPIDs are so different for everybody else. Like I said, they're 5 digits in length. They're alphanumeric characters, capitals, lower cases, everything like that on there. They are unique for everyone's single radio. There is not, like I said, you can't change it. You can't do nothing like that whatsoever with it. But understanding DPID is important because I could take my radio, and when you transmit, I can register your DPID to my radio. Now, what does that mean? Why is that important? Well, if I have user A, B, and C, so picture A, B, and C. Everybody's in a triangle, and at the top of the you could say the base of the triangle, you see A talking to B on DGID 1. Okay? Now you have user C kind of at the peak of that triangle, and they're on DGID 0. So they're talking, like one A that's talking to B, and they're talking back and forth. C is listening, and C will try to key up and be like, hey, da-da-da-da-da-da. No answer. Why? Well, because C is using DGID 00. All Alrighty? So A and B using 1, C's using 0, not gonna work in any way, shape, or form like that on there. Now we come into the play. Now we come into the aspect of what DPID does. What happens when you register your DPID between radios, it kind of ignores the DGID. So what happens in this case is that if I'm on now if we register, so I key up, and registration is really simple. All you do is the person's radio you want to register in your own, you're going to go into the menu system on your radio, and you're going to register a DPID. So when they key up, you hit a button, and it will say, register to this radio's DPID. Boom, you hit it. Now that ID, that DPID of that other radio, which is unique to that radio, is going to be registered in your radio, and vice versa. You can do it there. What that does is that anybody that you have your radio registered with, meaning you've registered their DPID, you've registered your DPID with them, regardless of what DGID they use, you will always hear them. So if you go back to this example that I had here, where it goes ahead and it shows, hey, I got A and B talking on DGID 1, I'm sitting here as user C on DGID 00. When I key up 00, not going to hear anything. But, if I register my DPID with B and B registers their DPID with me, even though I'm on 00, even though they're on 1, the minute I key up on DGID 00, the radio will say, oh, yep, no, we're on 1 here. Oh, hey, there's a DPID. I need to open up my receiver to broadcast that message through. Now, DPID also has more functionality built into it too. You can use it to register it to a repeater, and then that will allow you to do the Fusion telecommands on there. Alrighty. In the realm of Wires X, you could actually block someone through. Let me kind of describe it. You can block someone from your node, or you can block someone from your room using DPID. Now you're going to say, well, John, I can block them with a call sign, for those unfamiliar with Wires X. Yes, but remember, the DPID is always registered to the radio. So if today I go along and I put the call sign on my radio of N9UPC, and you block N9UPC on your Wires X node, I could just change it N9UPC-5 for my FT5, and now I key up, oh, your Wires X node is going to allow that to go through. Because guess what? It's not N9UPC anymore. It's N9UPC-5. It's not the same thing. But when you use the DPID to block someone, to register someone, then you go ahead and you have that ability to granulate it more, to kind of secure things a little bit more from that point there. So, just to recap, Yaesu System Fusion 2, the second generation which we're in right now, added DGID. DGID is like a CT-CSS DCS tone, where you can transmit and receive. You can transmit only, no receive. You can vice versa, whatever you do. You have codes 01 through 99. DGID 00 is turned off. 00 is off on there. And then it allows you to go ahead and selectively listen to people, access repeaters, do all those kind of things like that. DPID always calls out when you're transmitting in digital. Always. That's another thing about DPID. It always is embedded in your digital stream. Always. So when you have that in there, you got it always on there. So that's kind of the aspect of what we kind of are looking at. Once again, all this takes place when, regardless if you're using DN mode, VW mode, DW mode, that has no bearing on it. The thing that has the bearing on it is going ahead and saying, okay, how am I using it when I transmit in digital? All right, well, that's it for today's episode on the podcast on part 2. Part 3, we're going to dive into things a little bit more, kind of understanding how we can use it a little bit more on there, kind of some of the aspects on there, like what is there for using the different types of like modes of System Fusion in regards to, like, can I do a repeater? What is a repeater? How does it differ than Wires X? Those kind of things like that. That's going to be in part 3, which is next week's part of the podcast. So thank you for everybody that tuned into it. Remember, if you want to be kept abreast of our podcast and stuff like that on there, go to our Podbean channel, which if you're listening on there, it's YaesuUSA.podbean.com. Hit the like and subscribe button on there. If you like to watch it through our YouTube channel, we do list it as videos for kids, because in that way people, if we did it for people who are not, if it kind of gets goofy with YouTube, because if you list it as not made for kids, then if people have kids YouTube, they can't watch it, and we know that there are some groups and kids and stuff like that that do watch our videos, so that's why we usually make it, yes, it's made for children on there. It's not dangerous content either or anything like that. So until then, everybody, tune in to next week. Thank you for watching this podcast. Thank you for the feedback from last week's podcast. It's greatly appreciated, and we know how to bring more content. Until then, everybody, take care, 73, and we'll catch you on down the log.